All right, here's a question from Kevin. My former Muslim friend has heard the gospel, but is unwilling to pay the price. He says, if Christianity is true, I could only follow secretly. How would you answer his statement? I'd rather not answer what you said on prophecy, as my philosophy in life is to love, help, and not discuss differences. There's a lot there.
There's a lot there. Well, he's already violated his philosophy on life if he's not going to discuss differences, because he's now expressing his difference with the Christian and the Christian's viewpoint. All right. So the point, I want to say something about philosophy of life here, but I'm not exactly sure how to put it. You want to make sure whatever philosophy you have for life, that is, the principles that you choose to live by, are sound principles. They are wise, and in as much as they touch moral issues, they are moral. And, of course, you can have other philosophies that are just for your personal preference. That's fine, as long as your personal preferences aren't unsound or immoral. All right. And when I say unsound, that they don't trade on something or fly in the face of something that's true. The real question here is not what his philosophy of life happens to be, which he's actually just violated with the Christian by talking about differences. What really matters is what is true and right and good, and finding that out. Now, apparently, he's come to the conclusion that Islam is not true. All right, so he's abandoned that, former Muslim friend, and then he's raising objections about Jesus, following Jesus, and what he's saying is, I can't follow Jesus because it's inconvenient. I mean, that's another way of talking about sacrifice, too much sacrifice, which I happen to agree with him. It does entail sacrifice, some more than others, especially someone coming from a Muslim culture is going to probably have to embrace more sacrifice because there's such a radical difference between his culture, which is based in something false, and Christianity, which is grounded in something true, and for which there are long-term consequences. We're not just asking people to adopt a different frame of reference, or maybe that's not the best way to put it, a different philosophy of life. Well, here's your philosophy, here's my philosophy, you should adopt mine rather than yours. Okay, I mean, in a certain sense, philosophies of life are person-specific, okay? Now, they ought to be governed, as I said, by those earlier things, by wisdom and morality, etc. But we're not asking for people to just change their flavor, to change their club, to change, join our group. We're asking people to embrace reality. And if reality is the way that Christians claim, that is, Jesus' understanding of the world is sound, well, then that's a reality that he's going to have to face sooner or later. I remember my brother Mark telling me during that period of time, about a year, where he was talking to me about Christ before I became a Christian back in the early 70s. And at one point, Mark said to me, Greg, the things that I'm telling you are true. Sooner or later, you're going to find this out. I just hope that when you do, it isn't too late. Now, I think he's right about that. And also, I was impressed because of the confidence that he expressed by talking to me in that way, graciously, directly, but confidently. And the truth isn't going to change, Greg, just because you want something different. Well, the same concept applies here. If Jesus is who he claimed to be, then this former Muslim is going to have to stand before Jesus and give an account for his life. That's when the books are going to be opened, and everything that he's ever done wrong is going to be written out there, and he's going to have to give an account for that, and that will not be a pretty picture. And he will be judged according to his deeds and found wanting, and then cast in the lake of fire. I mean, that's Revelations 20. It's pretty straightforward. That's the reality, okay? And that's the question he ought to be asking himself, what's actually true, not what's going to be difficult for me in this life. Because if you take the easy way in this life that's not the true way, then you're going to have a difficult way for the rest of eternity. And that's just the simple calculus that people, I think, have to face. Now, of course, this all depends on whether or not Christianity is true, which is why that kind of question ought to be the one that's asked. And so I'm not sure what his dismissal of the prophecy issue happens to be. Maybe Kevin was sharing some fulfilled prophecy or some prophetic element that ought to have been at least considered to persuade his former Muslim friend, and now his friend is brushing that off. Well, if you brush it off because it's not persuasive, okay, that's one thing. If you're brushing it off because you don't like where it leads because it's going to make things harder for you, okay, well, that's an entirely different matter. Because if we're talking about, well, look, if somebody, parallel here, an analogy, if somebody is diagnosed with cancer and the doctor says, you got to get chemo, and the person says, chemo? Are you kidding me? I'll lose my hair. I'll be barfing all the time. I'll lose weight. I can't do that. Okay, what's the alternative? You're going to die. That's the alternative. If the cancer diagnosis is a sound one, all right? And to me, that's analogous to what this individual, the former Muslim, seems to be doing, and it's analogous to what a lot of people seem to be doing. Oh, that's too much. That's too hard. I'm not going to go there. I want an easier way. Okay, great. You're going to get an easier way for a short period of time.
And of course, if you have two different doctors offering two different courses of action to combat the cancer, you're going to want to discuss the differences.
That's right.
Because you want to know which one is actually going to work, which one is true, which one is effective.
That's right. That's right. So the analogy is even more appropriate than I thought. So I think that's what you're facing here. And what Kevin, your Muslim friend, I think needs to be challenged by is the question of truth here. We're not talking about flavors. We're not talking about, preferences. We're not talking about clubs that you join and you like one club rather than the other. We're not even talking really about a relativistic philosophy of life. What we're talking about is the way reality is structured. That's what we're talking about. And reality has a way of bruising people when they don't take it seriously. That's the cancer illustration, which is apropos to the salvation illustration. Find out what's true and then live according to that. Because if you don't, it's going to hurt you in the end.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we don't need to downplay the reality that there will be a cost. Jesus said to count the cost. Jesus wanted people to be aware that there is a cost. So you don't need to deny that this will cost him,
That's
obviously. Right. But even here, the only cost here is that he would be following secretly. I'm not sure exactly. He's not even worried about persecution. He's just, like you said, it seems like he's worried about the inconvenience, or maybe there's something in there about persecution too. But so I think you're right, Greg. The problem here is that he doesn't seem to care about truth, or he doesn't know that the claims about spiritual reality are claims about truth. Mm-hmm. So maybe just a simple question you could ask is there any place in your philosophy for truth? You mentioned these other things, love, help. Is there a place for truth? Mm-hmm. Does that truth matter to you? And if nothing else, you'll at least get him to start thinking about religion in a different way. Mm-hmm. And your analogies about cancer and not doing what you need to do because it's inconvenient, I think that's a great analogy, and that also might help him to understand. Does he care about reality? Mm-hmm. That's the question you want to get across.
My suspicion is he's relativizing this issue. It's almost as if, okay, if you want me to join your club, there might be some benefits to it, but I'll have to do it secretly. And that's just really inconvenient, so I'm not going to join your club. Instead of asking the other question, is what you're offering the truth or not? And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned about not being afraid of the cost. This is something I think that Christians who focus, I think, inordinately on the love of God as a technique of communicating the gospel. It's not wrong, because the Scripture speaks of that, for God so loved the world that he gave, etc. But it might be surprising for people to realize that the word love doesn't appear anywhere in the book of Acts, which means the disciples, when they evangelized, these disciples who were trained by Jesus, when they were evangelized, they didn't focus in on that. And I did a whole study of that in the book of Acts. You just go through every time the gospel is preached 13 times to individuals or groups and see what they said. And that's what I did. And so
Are you saying the word love isn't in the book at all, or isn't in the sermons?
it's not in the book.
Okay.
You look up love in your concordance, you won't find any reference in the book of Acts. Okay, it's just not there. Now, it's manifest there, of course, in different ways, the love of God, but instead there's an emphasis on the cost, okay, the cost of denying, and the danger of being in the wrong place before God and not covered by the forgiveness that Jesus provides. So there's certainly nothing wrong with us making that clear to other people. And here I was 50 years ago, Mark saying this thing to me, and I remember it to this day because it was so impactful. And now when I give the close at our realities, I always make this point. In fact, I made that particular point to 3,000 or almost 4,000 young people in Minneapolis just a few weeks ago. I said, there's going to be a reckoning, okay? The things I'm saying are true. Sooner or later, you're going to know that. I hope that when you do, it won't be too late. We let them know what the cost is.
Peter talks about this idea so much in 1 Peter when he talks about how we will suffer with Christ now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just a given. That's what we're supposed to expect. But we will also be glorified with him later.
Mm-hmm.
And if you reject that suffering now for glory now, then you will have suffering later.
That's right.
You're not going to avoid the suffering. There will be suffering either way. You either have it now or you have it later.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, you want it now.
That's right.
All right. Well, let me just say also, the glory you would have now cannot compare to the glory you will have later. But the same is true for the suffering.
Yeah.